So, hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. We are going to talk about DMARC and related things, specifically DMARC, the retail threat to email, BIMI, and some other cool stuff, all in sort of that universe of domain protection and protecting the email ecosystem. Why that's all important. Here at a high level is the agenda of what we're going to walk through today. We'll take you through all of these, the call to action at the end, in a way that you can take a self-assessment and identify what your own risk level is for your own domain and domain protection efforts. A little bit of housekeeping. Yes, we will share the recording afterward. And feel free to drop questions in the Q&A. Dean has kindly offered to shut questions as they come up. Scott, feel free to do the same if you notice anything in there that I haven't got to. Since I do only have one screen, it's often hard for me to catch the Q&A live. Folks, please do keep it interactive. Drop those questions when you have them. We'll probably have time at the end for questions, but we'll have time along the way too. So the more interactive, the better. Now let's start with introductions. I will save myself for last here. So let's start with my esteemed colleague, Scott Ziegler, VP Product at Valimail. Scott, you want to introduce yourself?
Hey everybody, great to meet you. Great to be here. So yeah, as Al mentioned, I run our product group here at Valimail. I've been here with Valimail for about 2 years. I've been in the email space for about 12 years, and excited to talk through some fun things today, both for retail, but also in the world of BIMI. We've got some fun stats that we're going to be able to share for the first time today.
Thank you, sir. And now, Dean, would you care to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Dean Coughlin, Senior Director of Industry Strategy at DigiCert, and I'm also Chair of the CA Browser Forum. I've been working on VMCs and BIMI since I think 2017, and am thrilled to see that come to fruition, verified marks and common marks, which we'll talk about later today in this briefing.
Thank you, sir. Hi, everybody. I'm Al Iverson. I do industry and community stuff for Valimail. My goal is to sort of make connections with people and better understand what's happening both in our customer base, the broader world as well, and just email as an ecosystem. How can we help connect people and help better protect and make that email ecosystem thrive? I have been working in email for a long time as well. I didn't think of it. I should have looked up when was the first time I actually wrote about BIMI for my blog. But I'll tell you the first time I wrote about DMARC for my blog, and that was 2012. So definitely been steeped in email authentication for a good long while now. Prior to Valimail, I was director of deliverability for one of those marketing cloud platforms for a good long time, 15 years. So been doing that email thing for a while. And let's kick her off here. So I want to kick things off with just a quick view of that retail threat landscape. There is so much bad email out there, as you probably well know. These are just a few examples of that from my own inbox just over the past few weeks as I put the final touches on the slides for this. There's so much bad email where people are pretending to be other people. Sometimes the brands are real. Sometimes the names of the companies they're using are real, but the emails are always fake, whether it be fake invoices or fake orders or fake affiliate messages pretending that they're associated with, a restaurant or a retail chain. There's usually something nefarious and slimy going on there behind the scenes. And if you're a retailer, you know what a huge problem this is for other people out in the world to be sending fake emails to pretend that they are you in a way that can damage your brand and damage trust and make it harder for you to be a legitimate retailer sending email marketing messages on the internet. And that's a big part of what we do, where we come into this, what we care about here. We block tons and tons and tons of bad emails. Now, this is all under the umbrella of DMARC. The goal there is domain protection. What DMARC does is it lets you publish a policy, a setting to tell the world what to do when mail purports to be from you, but isn't actually from you. So it fails authentication checks. And there's a whole bunch of important bits that go along with that too, but identifying all of the actual legitimate senders you use and making sure that you are authorizing all of those senders, everything's authenticating properly, and then logging, mapping out, understanding what other mail is out there in the world that purports to be from you. So basically, in a nutshell, DMARC starts with hey kids, get off my lawn, and helps keep people away from spoofing and phishing using your domain name successfully. A whole bunch of good stuff associated with that. So that's sort of the core security related driver for DMARC and why it's so important, especially in the retail context. And this data reflects that. This is data from a research paper we put together earlier this year on we took a dozen different industries and we mapped out the top X domains, top X companies for those different industries. How deep X was depended on the industry. I think the retail might have been 300 or 300 odd top domains, and these were all the biggest companies in the online retail space, right? They're either brick and mortars that have a strong online retail presence, or they're online focused retailers, or they are online support, the back end platforms for these different retailers. Think of your different shopping platforms where SMB stores go to start up their online efforts. So in that universe that we track, in the case of DMARC adoption in retail, we are in an interesting place there. And I say that because if you look at the biggest companies in the world, the broadest strokes, what's the adoption rate or understanding of DMARC? And that tends to be somewhere around 20%. 20% of domains, companies, whatever, across the board, when you flatten it down, tend to be aware of DMARC. It's on the uptick. It's probably a little higher now. I think the last time I looked at that was probably a few months ago. But even accounting for that little bump there, retail is far ahead of that in one dimension, in that they are aware of DMARC and have implemented some version of DMARC in a much more greater percentage than other industries, which is a good thing with a little bit of an asterisk, but it's a good starting point. And that 95% of the domains that we monitored in our specific retail segment at the bigger end of that retail segment, 95% of those have published a DMARC record. So they're aware of the need to protect a domain against phishing and spoofing. They're aware of the need to keep trust in email, to keep other people from being able to send email as them. They're aware of the modern sender requirements from Gmail and Yahoo and Microsoft, where they mandate that they must implement some level of a DMARC record and a DMARC policy. Now, that's a good transition to what does that mean with DMARC having implemented it versus a DMARC policy? And here's where you see a little bit of a difference and a little bit of a break away from that broad understanding. As I said, 95% of the retailer entities that we monitor in this space have heard of DMARC, they've implemented it, but only a small, much smaller percentage of them have actually implemented a policy where they protect their domain against phishing and spoofing. In other words, only 50% of these entities that have implemented DMARC are publishing a DMARC policy of reject. Only half of that 95% are telling the world that, hey, we authenticate everything. If it pretends, if it says it's from us and it doesn't actually pass those authentication checks, don't let it in the door. Reject it outright. And so when you factor in quarantine, the other enforcement level policy there, you end up with an enforcement rate across this industry that basically boils down to about 63%. So while it's good that the vast majority of retailers have heard of DMARC, there is still an enforcement gap where a significant, almost 40% of these retailers have not implemented DMARC in a way that protects their domain against phishing and spoofing. Now, if you think of all of the different things that you need to do to protect a company, to protect a website, to protect a commerce engine, a tech stack, DMARC's only part of those, right? There's a whole bunch of other stuff as well that's involved to protecting and securing um, infrastructure. But without this step in place, there is a specific gap here that people are leaving open so that people could impersonate emails. They could send out spam that uses their domain name. Bad guys could pretend to be them and actually get that mail delivered and actually be able to interrupt that trust with their subscriber base, their customers or their potential customers. That's kind of a scary thing. And that's part of what our mission here is as far as protecting DMARC against, protecting the world against phishing and spoofing using DMARC specifically. Larry's got a good point here, and we'll jump right into a question from the chat here. Keep it interactive. How scared should I be to go all the way to P equals reject in my record? How much legit mail do domains miss? That's a very good question. It does happen, and that is the scary thing with DMARC. If you don't have monitoring and understanding of those sending services, yeah, that's you're setting yourself up to sort of shoot yourself in the foot, and that you tell the world, hey, if it doesn't pass authentication checks, then it's not legit and don't let it through. But what about mail you might have missed? And yeah, that does happen to some degree, and that's sort of the kicker there. And that's where you need a platform like us to be able to actually show you where the mail is coming from, show you what senders are in use, and help you categorize and authorize those senders.
Al, Carol is
Yeah.
asking, what is DMARC? Maybe we need to back up a little bit and just talk about a quick tutorial on that.
Yeah, I am so sorry. I sort of assume everybody has the acronyms memorized. Domain-based message authentication, reporting, and conformance. There's the starting bit of the mouthful right there. And what it is, DMARC is a DNS text record. It is a policy setting for an email domain. And what you do with DMARC is you tell people what to do if mail fails authentication checks when sending as my domain. So if I am aliverson.com and I publish a DMARC record of P equals reject, I am telling the world if you're Yahoo or Gmail or Microsoft and you receive an email message that comes from aliverson.com and it fails authentication checks, it doesn't have SPF authentication, doesn't have DKIM authentication, doesn't have some sort of matching, aligning authentication setting, aligning meaning an authentication domain matching a from domain. So you're not, when you align, you're authenticating the from domain. If all of that is lacking, there's no authentication there, no proof that it was actually from aliverson.com, reject that mail. That's what a DMARC policy of reject does. With DMARC, there are 3 levels of policy: none, quarantine, and reject. And trying to condense a very big and complex thing down into something you could put on the back of a bar napkin goes like this. You set up DMARC with P equals none so that you can monitor, get visibility, look at reporting, use a tool like Valimail to actually map out where mail purporting to be from your domain is coming from. You match that up to what services are legitimate. Make sure you've got all of the proper email authentication settings in play. When you're confident that you're authenticating all that mail, again, back to Larry's point before, that's the trip up there is that some people miss things if somebody has what we call shadow IT. Like if you're a big company and somebody in HR or marketing set up a sending service, set up, got a MailChimp account, set up a Substack, or HR is using an outsourced provider to handle job applications. All of those services sending email as you, if IT didn't know about them to configure them properly, you might get missed, you might have trouble, you could run into problems with it rejecting unauthenticated mail. Now, if you get past that and make sure everything's authenticated, then it's okay to move up to that next level policy, to that quarantine or reject policy. Quarantine meaning you're asking mailbox providers to look at email messages much more closely, give them much more scrutiny, and they're probably not legitimate. Maybe they should go to a quarantine folder or a spam folder for further examination versus and then that highest level step there, the most secure you can be, equals P equals reject, where you tell it to reject mail, don't accept it at all, don't let it through the door if it pretends to be from me but doesn't pass the actual checks that are necessary to prove that a message came from me. There you go. I'm gonna take a breath here, and hopefully there's your you put the Nickelodeon jukebox. You get definition of DMARC. Scott, what do you think? What should we add to that, if anything?
No, I think your definition's great. I think the only thing I was gonna ask you to put in perspective, and maybe this is bringing it back to the slide we have here. Um, I don't know if you know off the top of your head, Al, but you did talk about how retail is doing well in terms of demark policy compared to the global trend. Then we talked about how there's still quite a few policies here that are at none versus quarantine and reject. But if I recall, this is still pretty good. Meaning, having 70-ish% of folks be at some level of enforcement is still a good place to be. Is that fair, or am I misremembering the state of DMARC report at the global scale?
You are actually spot on there. That retail is a bit ahead of everybody else there. There are other segments like arts and entertainment. I can't remember the actual terminology, but it was a combination of hospitality and the arts and some other stuff where the sort of the industry enforcement rate was like in the low 20s. So that was at the very worst end, and then everybody else was sort of in the middle there. So retail is an interesting thing where there's probably a lot more email marketing, and email marketers are worried about deliverability. Hopefully, they're following the trusted guidance of their friendly neighborhood deliverability consultant for whatever marketing platform they use. They've told them about the Gmail and Yahoo requirements, probably drove them to implement to publish a DMARC record, but perhaps not everybody has that deep understanding of what to actually do with DMARC. So I think what I see here when I look at this, when 95% of them have DMARC, but only half of them have it set to reject, a lot of them, at least probably close to that 30% of 29% that are at none, probably just sort of blindly copied and pasted what their deliverability person told them they need to do to make sure that they're following the Yahoo and Gmail guidelines. So it's both good and bad, right? It's good that they're more aware, but there's still sort of that last mile of knowledge that's still missing. Last minute news here. It's a little bit of a wedge to shove this in here, but I imagine this would come up in discussion because this just was announced this week. And thinking of it in the context of, like I said, retailers being aware of DMARC and being aware of the modern bulk sender requirements, the modern best practices that Gmail, Yahoo, and Microsoft have announced going all the way back to October 2023, when Yahoo and Gmail first announced these updated set of sender requirements. Gmail just announced that they're upping enforcement. They're ramping up enforcement. What that means is that if you were one of those edge case senders where you don't totally comply, you don't exactly know what you're doing, you haven't monitored everything, you're not looking at complaint rates, you're not making sure if you're fully compliant with the authentication requirements they're mapping out in those in that mandate, you are more likely from now going forward to find mail getting rejected when you try to send it. That's not a good thing. So that's something to be aware of. This just came out just like on Monday or Tuesday, November 3rd, I think, when Gmail added this to one of its frequently asked questions pages. So we're not going to turn this into a sender compliance webinar, but the quick hits here are all over. You can search Google sender requirements, Yahoo sender requirements. I'm focusing here on Gmail, but we're actually moving towards a sort of parity over time where they're all sort of converging to very similar policies. So the broad strokes of those policies are authentication, SPF, DKIM, and DMARC, setting up those protocols or enabling that authentication and setting up a DMARC record, making sure you have alignment. Alignment stuff like SPF is based on one of the domain names in a certain header in the envelope sender or return path header, or a little technical bit of hidden header. DKIM is based on a domain name in a hidden header called DKIM signature. And so then you've got a from address. And so alignment is when the SPF domain equals the from address domain, or the DKIM domain equals the from address domain, or they both do. That's alignment. One or both of those passing, matching, and authenticating, that's alignment. So whenever we talk about why is alignment so important, it's proof that an authentication header is for the domain showing in the from address. So that's visible proof. We're going to talk more about visible proof when we get to Dean's part a little bit here down the road, talking about the option to show that blue check mark, to show that enhanced level of trust, to show off to consumers that you are doing everything right, both to help drive trust for the end recipient of the email, but also to show the mailbox provider that you're on top of things and you know what you're doing. Um, so I'm not going to go through the whole list here. In fact, I do have a little Ask Al video that's coming out on LinkedIn tomorrow. Watch the Valamail LinkedIn page for that. I'll recap this in more detail. And feel free to hit us up with questions now or later too. If you have this, I'd be happy to tackle this in more detail in a separate session.
Al, let me add one more small plugin, just
Yeah.
quickly, is if you are using our Valamel Monitor product, the free product, we do have a new report out there which kind of takes the Google data and simplifies it all into one interface. So you can see if you're having issues, it goes a lot beyond just DMARC and goes into all of these other areas. But Google's putting these warnings out in your SMTP logs. And if you say, wait, what is that? Where do I find it? Of course, that's part of the issue here. So they have added that to the DMARC reports. We've got that into the product itself. So it gives you a chance to see if any of your mail's at risk right now. And as they continue to kind of turn up the enforcement here, you're able to see what's impacted, what's at risk, and what could get impacted in the future if they apply it a little stricter across all of your mail.
Now that reporting from Google that they put in this, what we think of in email land as sort of SMTP level rejection info, they're putting that in the DMARC reporting. For those of you that are email nerds, you already know how to get that from SMTP logs, but you already know what a pain that can be to get that from SMTP logs. And those of you who are not, if you don't know what I'm talking about, if you don't know SMTP from a falafel, right? You don't have to, right? SMTP logs are what MailChimp gets back when you try to send, what your marketing cloud gets back and logs when you try to send, when that send fails. So these sending platforms that you send through capture that in their logs in the recordings for their mail server as they send out the mail for you. Now, whether or not they expose that to you in reporting or try to summarize it or make it available to you, you have to get it from them. The mechanism to do that varies. It's different across all these different platforms. And especially if you manage multiple platforms, even if you are, as I said before, maybe you're SMTP savvy, you know what I'm talking about, that could be a bunch of different places you got to get all these logs from, versus Google now putting it also in the DMARC reporting. That means you've got one place to go to look for those specific failures related to this new compliance mandate in the DMARC reporting across your whole organization. Meaning you don't have to go, if you have 6 sending platforms, you don't have to get it from 6 different separate SMTP logs and figure out how to alert on those separate services, the separate mail platforms. It's actually now in your DMARC reporting, and we've surfaced it in our Valamail platform. So you can look at it and get access across your organization to stuff that used to be previously only hidden in the mail server logs of actually doing the mail transactions to send your outbound email messages. So that's pretty cool. I do think that Scott likes to geek out about that, and I approve 100% because as I am an email geek, I do know where to go get the mail server logs, and it is a pain in the butt sometimes. And so to have that data available and visible to me in a much easier mechanism, much easier way, I think is super cool. And if you want to start to check, you're worried about, hey, does my domain comply? There's a whole bunch of ways you can check that. One of the good places to start is our domain checker tool. You can Google the Valamail domain checker, plug your domain in there, and we'll check the authentication settings, tell you what we see, give you some suggestions, and help point you in the right direction there. So we've talked. Hey, you put the nickel in the jukebox. I gave you the 5-minute, slightly breathy description of what DMARC actually is, and how do you get to DMARC enforcement. Right? When we talk about DMARC enforcement, it means telling the world that don't let the mail through if it says it's from me, unless you can actually prove that it's from me. That's what you do with the Valamail platform. You identify senders with our Valamail Monitor platform. You move to an enforcement posture using Valamail Enforce. You have us manage the mechanisms behind the scenes to update and track your SPF records, to update and manage DKIM keys. But where do you go from here? And what's potentially and particularly of value to retailers? And I think that is BIMI. BIMI is brand indicators for message identification. It is a logo specification for email messages. It lets you show a logo in the inbox. And if you do it right, you go the whole way with a verified mark certificate. Talk more about that in a sec. Get that little blue check mark there in the top right example, just to show off that you've been verified and that your domain's on enforcement, and that you are a trustworthy sender. The cool thing about this too, it's broadly supported across a bunch of different mailbox providers. Adoption of it is growing. Now, I'm going to be eyes wide open about it. There's a gap here in that, unfortunately, Microsoft does not support BIMI today. I think that, to me, that sort of tells us that BIMI is the logo standard is very consumer B2C oriented today. So don't let that stop you. There's good opportunity here to get a BIMI logo in place to be able to show and this extra opportunity to show off your brand in Yahoo and AOL, in Gmail, in Apple iCloud, in Fastmail, and a bunch of other mailbox providers, both smaller ones in the US and around the world. So uh, some of these, again, not every place supports BIMI, but if you're a consumer email sender, this is sort of a randomized breakdown that I got from a specific online store who blogged about their list breakdown. And I know from my background in helping B2C or D2C, direct to consumer email senders with deliverability issues, I know that this is a fairly average list breakdown for a consumer sender. Your mileage may vary, but I think this is pretty close to a good average across the board. And you can see Gmail, Google is huge there. Yahoo and AOL are huge there. So just the two of those, right? That's more than 75%. So you add on their Apple, which is growing. You add on their Comcast and others. There's still a whole bunch of good opportunity to show your logo in the inbox with BIMI. And that's where the value is, I think, is all those places where you can get another opportunity to just stand out in the inbox and not just be, to go backwards here, really screwed up here a little bit, not just be a letter that shows up, but to actually show up as your own logo. Here's how you can visualize that in our platform. The BIMI simulator. This is free for all ValidMail users. So if you're not familiar with ValidMail and you want to get started, when you go sign up for our ValidMail monitor, that's our free level of DMARC monitoring, so you can get visibility into who's sending mail as your domain. This will be available even in the free tier. So yeah, if you're a paid customer, it'll be there too, but we just want to make it clear that it's available to everybody. It lets you sort of plug in a logo. Maybe you're not ready to go yet. Maybe you don't have something trademarked or don't have long enough use to prove what you need to prove. You just want to mock it up. This is a good mock-up tool. It lets you plug in a logo, lets you show you how it's going to look in an email message. And you can see here, this is where you really stand out, right? Like I said, if you don't have BIMI, other people who don't have BIMI, they're just going to show up as one or two letters in there versus you get a chance to actually have your logo show up in the inbox. So Scott, why don't we talk about that lift that we think that our data shows that you get from a BIMI logo?
Yeah, so I mentioned this at the start, and this is news we haven't been able to share externally, so you're going to hear it for the first time. But BIMI is something I personally I love it, I believe in it. But as I talk to marketers, I always get questions of, well, are you really sure about that? Is BIMI going to work? Is it going to give me a lift? Is it going to actually kind of hold through and help me on this? So Alf, we go to the next slide. I wanted to kind of talk through these questions, but what we did here at Valamel is we've gone with a few different companies and we have I'll call it sponsored them to get a BIMI cert, and this is working with DigiCert to go through the process and to get a VMC and help our customers through this. But we wanted to make sure that we were putting our claims of how valuable this is. We wanted to validate it. So in exchange for us helping them through that process and giving them some incentives to get into BIMI, they have allowed me to share their stories. Now, I want to be clear, I can't share all these stories. When you talk to folks about BIMI, they usually are pretty guarded because it's going to talk about their exact email program, their email program performance. And if they are seeing lifts, they may not want all of their friends or competitors to know about those sorts of lifts. So what we're going to have today is fairly anonymized, but I'm going to talk through three different situations here. So let's actually talk about the story one. Does BIMI actually move the needle? So we were working with a brand, Al, on the next slide here, that wanted to roll out Bimmy, and so they put this out actually in March of this year, and they put it out halfway through March, and they saw an immediate lift. So even in that partial month, not having this fully there, but even in that partial month, they saw a 4.5 percentage point lift year over year. But we wanted to measure that first full month. So we had, we looked at April. And by the way, we're comparing, they gave us access to see their open rates before for last year, and then their open rates now for this year. Same campaign, same sort of thing that they're sending, giving us as close to apples comparison as we could get for month, for seasonality, for all of those things, and looking at this lift. When we looked at April, their open rates jumped from 53% last year's April to 63% this year's April. So this is one where it is an immediate impact. Having a trust mark, having a trusted email in a consumer brand, this had a huge impact for them. I should also note, this is not only looking at those consumer inboxes, this is looking at their email program overall. So as we talk about, Microsoft not having that lift, or maybe some other edge cases where they might be sending email out, that's in this. So it wasn't even just the Bimmy emails. This is their entire email program for that campaign, for that domain. 10 percentage point lift. And I say this because I'm looking at the attendees here. Y'all might be marketers. We a lot of times work with the IT team as we're helping to work through this. You get to an enforcement and you set this up. And they saw this was the IT team we were chatting with. They said, "Is that good? Is 10% good?" And I tried to take a step back, and I realized that's just not the sorts of things that they even thought to share with the marketing team. And I said, I know some marketers who might give their left arm for that sort of a lift. This is a big deal. And so glad to be able to tell that one. So did it move the needle? That's great. You got that bump. Does that bump stay? And so second story here that we're going to talk through is we actually took a domain and looked at this across 6 months. And so he said, great. So let's look at a 6 month period. So it's not just something new, something novel. Let's look across a 6 month period. Did this help? In this case, it was 5 percentage points average lift across that 6 month period. So it continued to stay there. It helped, but it stayed. And so my takeaway here is that this lift does hold. And again, we're talking about trust. We're talking about how you're showing your brand, how you're connecting with your consumers, how you're reaching out in the same sorts of ways, but we're adding that logo in. And in this case, all three of these we're talking about were VMCs that would have a check mark. And I think we're going to talk about some of those pieces as well later. But these are VMCs that are showing a trust mark within the data and within the email experience. So great. I can get a huge bump. I can get a lasting bump. But the last piece that I talk with marketers about, and I think this one comes into play here for us heading into Black Friday, is yeah, and I might want to bump up my list a little bit, whether I'm going to send to more people or whether I'm going to send more mail to the same people. And I've heard that rumor, just send more, just send more. That's going to help, right? And you're going to be in this world where you're sending a lot more mail, whether it's to new folks or if it's to your same folks that's sending more messages. So we wanted to look at that case, which was higher volume. Now, this is one where it was not something we were checking of which piece of higher volume. We didn't get that far into their ESP data to see exactly how they were doing this, but we could tell their send volume was increasing. So we looked across monthly sending and specifically targeted places they wanted to ramp up the sending volume. So 2 to 3x sending volume increase, but they still saw year over year, no BIMI to BIMI, an increase in open rates. At the low end, it was a 2 percentage point increase. At the high end, it was a 9 percentage point increase. So even though they're sending more mail, and is the more mail you send, there's a risk that you could have your engagement dwindle a bit, or maybe you try to dust off that old list a little bit and reach out to folks that weren't as engaged. In this case, they were able to safely expand their email volume, send more mail, and see the open rates continue to increase. So my takeaway on this is trust lets you scale safely. And I realize there's going to be some nuance to all of this, and I apologize, I can't go into the exact details. That was part of our agreement on the keeping this anonymous, but we are very excited about being able to share some of these data points and put this in perspective. And we would encourage anybody who wants to learn more about Bimmy to chat with us and see how we can help. So, Al, if we go to the last slide here, I think my takeaway on this is when your brand's visibly trusted in the inbox, everything goes just a little bit better. And so, what I hope for us to see, tying this picture in of what Al was just talking about, and I'm going to bring this back to retail. Retail's in a great spot. Retail has DMARC at a high adoption rate. Retail actually has DMARC enforcement at a high adoption rate. That means that you're ready for this next step. It's right there. And it is easier now than ever with how Valamail and Digicert are here to help guide you through this process. And hopefully some of this data that we've just been able to show to you helps bring in the exact value that you're going to see. And what I will also, just a little plug here, is if you are on the security side or the IT side, yeah, this is helpful too. It's a trust mark. It shows you that the mail is authenticated. But please reach out to your marketing friends and see if they'd be interested in a few percentage point lifts or even a quick bump as they're heading into Black Friday or Cyber Monday. Because right now, everybody's going to be shouting at consumers, and you want your message to stand out. And Bimmy is just one of those ways you can do that.
Thank you, sir. So this is a good segue to talk about where certificates play into this. And the reason we're talking about certificates is because one of the setup steps for BIMI, as necessary to get your logo to show up in Gmail and in the Apple iCloud ecosystem with publish is a little bit beyond just publishing a BIMI record. You have to go one more step and be verified, have a mark certificate that identifies who you are. And that's how these mailbox providers, Apple and Gmail, get the confidence to know that it's okay to show your logo, or in some cases also show that check mark. And that's why we've got Dean Coughlin here from DigiCert to talk about the role these certificates play in this process.
Thank you, Al. Thanks, Scott, for that great intro into how this really works and the benefits of it. But let's talk about the certificates. So as Al indicated, there are two different types of certificates that can be used to display your mark. One is called a verified mark certificate, or VMC, and the other is called a common mark certificate, or a CMC. A verified mark is based on your trademark. You have to have a valid trademark that's filed with one of 17 trademark offices. These are in approved countries, approved by Gmail. And if you have that, then you can get a certificate, a VMC, that will have a distinguished user interface with that blue check mark that Al mentioned. And we'll show you a demonstration of this in a moment. If you don't have a trademark, though, you are eligible for something called a CMC. This is where we can show, or you can prove to us that your logo has been in use for at least the prior 12 months. Now, or this could also be a modified existing trademark. For example, if you have a trademark that has, for example, two names concatenated together that won't quite fit in that avatar, you might be able to stack those names, and that would be a modified mark. That would be eligible for a CMC. Now, in both cases, we do strong validation of the entity applying for the certificate. We validate the domain, the organization, the trademark, and the person applying for the certificate via a face-to-face phone call. This way, we ensure that your domain is protected and help give that boost to increase customer trust. Marketing people love the brand recognition from the logos. IT people love the fact that there's a security benefit to this whole thing. So this brings IT and marketing together for the first time, maybe, to help promote security and brand recognition on the internet. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we are validating the domain much like we do for any SSL certificate. We're validating that it is a real business by checking with business directories. We're validating the trademark directly with one of those 17 trademark agencies. And I know somebody just asked about what are those agencies. So I'll see if I can do them off the top of my head. So you have the US, Canada, Brazil, England, Germany, France, Spain, Australia, Japan, let's see, New Zealand, and now I'm missing 7 countries, but we'll have the list. I'll get it to you in the chat after I finish talking. But there's an extensive list of countries that are approved for trademarks. We verify that the logo is in the correct format, which is an SVG mini PS format. And then we, as I said, we validate the applicant through a face-to-face video call. Next slide. So here's what it looks like with a verified mark certificate. In Gmail, you will see this blue check mark. And when you hover over that blue check mark, you get this display that says the sender of the email has verified that they own the domain and the logo in the profile image. So now you've got not just the fact that you're getting the logo out to everybody, but you're adding the security benefit by showing that blue check mark which says that they own this domain. So this gives strong authenticity to the fact that this email is real to your recipients. The blue check mark does not show in a CMC or common mark, but the common mark will show the logo. Next slide. Okay, I think I'm going to turn it back to Al while I do some research on those 17 trademark countries.
Yeah, the only one I remember is that not Mexico, right? Because that what came up in the discussion because the client asked about it. Scott, you built this cool tool, the retail risk self-assessment tool. Could you tell us about that?
Well, I will take credit if you like it, and if you don't like it, we'll say it's a marketing tool that we have available out on the website. But yes, the retail risk self-assessment is just a quick way for you to get a view. You answer a small set of questions, and we'll give you a quick risk score on how you're doing. Those questions vary from do you have a DMARC policy in place? Have you considered setting something up? Is it ad enforcement? What I like about this, and again, more just Scott's fun coding behind the scenes, is that you might say, no, I don't have a DMARC policy. And guess what? I'll still go check for you and I'll look in DNS. And if you think you don't have a DMARC policy, I will tell you if you have one. If you think you have it at enforcement and it's actually not there, I will give you that feedback as well. So what I've got here is a quick and easy way to see how you are doing against perhaps some others, give you some scoring on this, what your risk level is, but it gets into how often are you reviewing your security policies, other sorts of things too. So I encourage you to take a peek at this. I encourage you to dig in and see how you're doing. And if you have any questions on it, of course, you can reach out to us here at Valamel. We're happy to help you through it as well. But it just gives you that sort of state of of your current retail campaign and helps you know if you need to dig in anywhere else. And I hear it a lot too. People always want to know, am I okay? And not even am I okay? That's great, Al, that you gave me the jukebox and you walked through all of these details, but can you just give me a quick report that tells me how I'm doing and where I might want to dig in? That's what this is for. So it helps you identify the areas that you might want to look at a little more closely as you head into what is almost always the biggest email sending season of the year.
And thank you, Scott. Thinking, and actually, you made me think. Some people, hey, do you even know if you have a DMARC record or not? Not only could it be that your IT or security person or consultant might have set something up for you without you knowing, especially if you're not particularly savvy about that sort of thing. Or, for example, one of the biggest domain registrars, GoDaddy, has started adding a default DMARC record to new domains. Added this a few months ago. So if you register a brand new domain with GoDaddy by a domain name, it's going to have a DMARC record. And how is that configured and where are reports going? They're not dumb people by any means. They're setting up so that domains that are not in active use yet have some modest level of protection. It's very much a good thing. I'd like that GoDaddy does that. But what you need to do if you want to actually have visibility into what's going on with who's sending mail as your domain, you might need to go in and edit that and update that and actually change it to point it at a DMARC provider like us to be able to see what's going on there. And so understanding what you might have in a DMARC record today is probably going to be your first step in some cases. And that's one thing that the retail risk assessment tool can help you do. So that brings us to the end of the prepared stuff for today. We're happy to answer any questions here. We've got a few minutes before we've got to wrap her up and push Scott on to his next meeting. I'm going to tackle one question here out of the chat. That is this: how do I know if emails are failing DMARC because DMARC is doing its job blocking bad actors from sending under my name? or because my settings might be wrong? That's a great question, and the answer, of course, is Valamail, right? Or any DMARC provider. That's the function of DMARC reporting, is to give you that feedback, to tell you about mail that you perhaps are not seeing because somebody else is trying to send mail as you and it's getting rejected because it's failing those checks. Now, the big mailbox providers, like Google, for example, they send this reporting, this aggregate feedback reporting via email in a format called XML. It's sort of human readable. You can pull IP addresses and domain names out of the code. But if you want to map it to geolocation, to trends over time, to being able to alert on specific pass or failure scenarios, that's where you want to be able to feed it into a tool or platform where it will visualize and map out what is actually contained in those feedback reports coming from the mailbox providers. And that's what Valamail, that's the core of what we do. That's where we started in all of this, is to be able to take that data and process it and visualize it for you. What else do we have here? Somebody had a question about deliverability to QQ.com. Unfortunately, that's just a little bit too far out of scope. And frankly, if I had some good, easy advice for a starting point for deliverability to Chinese domains, I'd be happy to share it with you. But I know it's a tricky thing, and unfortunately, it's not something that we're going to be able to solve for you in a few seconds here. All right, I think that's most of the questions. I'm just checking the last thing here.
There's a couple of questions
Juggling.
in the Q&A that you have an analysis on VMC lift versus CMC only lift.
I don't think so yet. I don't. What do you guys think?
We don't have that breakdown. CMCs are still relatively new. I think if you track and you can see some of this, there's lots of tools. Valamail has one as well to kind of show you what we're seeing registered and what's coming through. But VMCs are still kind of the primary. CMCs are starting to catch on a little bit. But there isn't a ton of data, unfortunately, out there on Lyft. That's why I was excited to be able to at least give something. I joke that I kind of feel like some of the most recent data actually goes back to what Yahoo had put out almost 10 years ago or 5 years ago when I think it was 2019-ish that they were talking about here's what we're seeing. And there hasn't been a lot of updates since then. So we're hoping to get some more examples. We're hoping to be able to talk through this. I view it, I'll give my personal opinion here. I don't mean to hop on my soapbox, but if you're able to get a VMC, get a VMC. If you have the trademark, get the trademark. You're going to get that extra blue check mark, which is helpful for Gmail. And that is, I like to think of it as not just for a marketing and a logo purpose, but absolutely for a trust mark and a check mark purpose. That can help on both sides. But there are lots of reasons to also go forward with the CMC. I like CMCs because they give you some flexibility. And I was just working with a brand who's trying to figure out what they can do and how they can go forward with newly, created marks that they're trying to work with. And there still are some restrictions on CMCs for usage, but there's those marks. Are they close enough to what they've done already? Are they close enough to things that they've used before? They can get out there and start using CMCs even before the trademark is formally approved, because that does take some time to go through those offices that Dean was mentioning. So if we get the data, I'd love to show it. What I was comparing, just for clarity, was a VMC in all of those cases versus a no BIMI. And so that was the difference here for that data.
We have, we'll be honest with you, we've there's a bit of a technical struggle to A/B test logo versus no logo, and that's because of the baby steps way that BIMI has first implemented and how it's supported by the mailbox providers. It's a domain level setting. It trickles down to all sends for the domain. You can do it with, or you can do it with different subdomains. But the point is, it's not some sort of setting where you can easily split half the list with the logo turned on and send to the other half of the list with the logo turned off. So you have to do metrics over time to do that, and that's trickier and harder for people to do in ways that provide more of an apples to apples comparison. So that's why you haven't seen 50 different use cases of the lift from BIMI yet. Thankfully, when we do get results, they're universally positive. So that's a good thing, and I think you're going to see more of these use cases over time. It's just been a bit of a technical struggle. Without getting too far in the weeds, there's a thing called selectors. That's a component of BIMI that's going to make that a little bit easier. Give a sender more control over when and where their logo is going to show. But that it's got a bunch of stakeholders that have to support it. You got to have the sending platforms like your Mailchimps or Salesforce Marketing Cloud or Zeta or whatever. All have to support it on their end. Then you have the mailbox providers like Gmail, Yahoo, and Apple all have to support it on their end. And then you've got to be able to read those results and understand what you're looking at on top of that. So it gets pretty complex quickly. And so that's in a nutshell, I think, why you don't see a million different boost related case studies of it so far.
There's one more question. It says a Stripe.com phishing email sent to our Google group slipped through filters and it was re-signed with our domain and looked legit to our team. I don't know if there's a question there, but maybe you can comment on that.
Yeah, and I think that highlights to remember that though you lock the door, you also need to lock the window, right? There's multiple paths for a bad guy to get inside the system, and not all of them, unfortunately, are going to be stopped with DMARC, right? What DMARC does well is it blocks the ability for somebody else to send externally as your domain. What it doesn't do is it doesn't protect somebody from hacking into a coworker's email account and sending out emails from their copy of Microsoft Outlook that are going to pass the authentication checks from the desktop computer of that person. Right? That's why it's a part of a broad, comprehensive security strategy. Right? You got to protect everything, not just the email domain. Two-factor accounts, zero trust, and all the different things you need to do to monitor and be able to mitigate the potential for attacks. I get that a lot where people, every once in a while, somebody's sort of being snarky about DMARC will forward me an email and say, haha, DMARC didn't stop that. Well, no, it didn't because it's only one tool. It's sort of like complaining that you're yelling at me that this I can't use this wrench to turn the screw. It's the wrong tool for that job. There's multiple tools in the arsenal, and what DMARC does do, it does quite well.
And last question, are we seeing an uptick in phishing and or domain appropriation attacks? Is AI making attacks easier? I think the second question is kind of rhetorical, but what do you think about the first one?
I know that this is one of our CEO's favorite topics because so many in the cybersecurity sort of ecosystem are really uh, not scared by AI, but they're seeing how it's really changing the game, and it's making it so that bad guys can easily and with little effort spin up 50 million iterations of their bad guy messaging to try to find the sweet spot to be able to get through and trick somebody better and faster. One of the good things, though, is that at the same time, the defenses against this sort of thing, against overall phishing and spoofing, against trying to read intent in messages and trying to better filter those messages. A lot of that's driven by UI as well. You think of by AI as well. You think of the black box, the engines behind, Microsoft Defender for Microsoft 365 or Google Workspace and Gmail and all the efforts they're doing to block illegitimate mail. Those are informed by AI as well. So it's a bit of an arms race. Yes, it can be a little scary. My take is that it's sort of a natural evolution, and so far I haven't seen anything that makes it clear that AI is just blowing through defenses. I will warn that you have to be careful as you make tools to protect other people that you don't forget what we've learned from the legacy of trust and security with existing and past tools. Meaning, don't, I'm going to get you out of here in 2 seconds, Scott, I promise. But don't forget about stuff like DMARC. There was a bug in one of the Apple iOS betas where it was calling phishing emails important. And if you look at the email, it failed authentication checks. It failed DMARC. But the AI let it come through anyway and highlighted it as important. The flaw there And I don't mean to name and shame Apple because it's a beta. They're learning their way. But the flaw there is that I suspect somebody designing the AI said the thing is smart. It's the future. We'll let it figure it out. And they forgot to use the tests that Apple already knows about to check for email authentication, to check for that DMARC failure. So don't forget about it might they might have thought that DMARC might not be cool to include it in those checks, but it was very important to do that. So as AI gets to help us filter and block more messaging, make sure that it is trained to incorporate those legacy signals. That's me getting on my soapbox about
Al, I'm going to
AI.
add one more piece of color to that because I had the privilege of working with a couple of the key mailbox providers, and one of the reasons that you're seeing things like the sender requirements come into play and requiring things like DMARC to be in place and continuing to expect, as you should expect, that it's going to ratchet up and you're going to expect the policy won't be a P equals none requirement for forever. It is expected to go to quarantine or reject. They want everyone to be at enforcement because it will push the abuse to somewhere else. When you're starting to block things through DMARC, the bad guys are still going to look for other angles to try to reach out and find their way through. And some of those other angles cost a little more. Some of those other angles are a little easier to criminally prosecute if they try to go through those routes. And so this is all a positive thing. Abuse is not going to stop, and DMARC is not going to be a silver bullet that will stop everything. But by having this in place, it is making it harder. Now, AI still comes into play. People, we're seeing a lot more things with what's called reputation hijacking and trying to do lookalike domains are coming back into style a little bit and other things. But that's where I like to remind that BIMI can be yet another way to make sure that your logo is showing up properly. So it's not just, hey, does that look like, my domain, but does it have the logo that I'm used to seeing and expecting to be there? So trust marks are yet another way that you can help with this, but nothing's going to solve it all. And I'm just gonna jump in on Larry because Larry looks like you also gave your opinion, but I am going to remind folks P equals none. If you are a bulk sender, with that little blurb we had about Google and with some of the changes that are happening at Microsoft, your P equals none policy is not actually being treated as P equals none. It's going to end up in a spam folder. It's going to get blocked per the sender requirements. So what I would encourage you to do is get a handle on where your mail is. But if you are questioning, I'm not quite sure what's happening, use something like Valamail or use something to give you that visibility. It's very important. But just realize your P equals none policy is probably getting treated as if it was quarantine or reject. And I do think that people should be trying to move themselves to a quarantine policy. I think that is the best place that you can go. Do it responsibly. Don't just do it blindly. But understand that that is where the industry, and especially folks like Google and Yahoo and Microsoft and Fastmail and a whole other slew of mailbox providers are all pushing the senders to get to. So it's going to be there, and they're going to start pushing you there. I'd rather get there on your own terms than let them make that choice for you.
Thank you, Scott. Folks, we are up against a hard stop, so we're going to wrap things up there. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Dean. It's been great to talk to you both today. Thank you, everybody who attended. Thank you for your questions and interactivity. And keep an eye out. We're going to upload the video and share it back out to you via email here as soon as it's ready to go. So please, everybody, have a great day. And thank you so much for joining us today.